and letting Rochelle know as questions come up, but there'll certainly be time to present questions also at the end as well. So without further ado, I can see your slideshow, Rochelle. I just don't see you, but that's okay.
I can see me.
Oh, there you are. I can see you. Great. So there's Rochelle Filler, our expert in financial aid. And we will be getting started. And then our first question is, are you going to be emailing the presentation? We will be recording and posting this presentation on our website. And does the slideshow go along with that, Rochelle? That would be included in the video, obviously, but is there a separate upload of the slideshow? Do you know?
I guess that would be up to you folks.
Okay.
If you're recording it and you want to share it.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can figure out that later, but we're at least recording the program for this evening. So yes, it'll be available. All right. I'm going to turn off my mic for now. I'll pop in as we have questions.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. I can see there's a good number of people here wanting to know about financial aid. I've been in financial aid for close to 30 years. At RPI, I worked at Siena. I've worked at SUNY Cobleskill. And sadly, I was also at St. Rose, my alma mater, which is no more. But I've been doing this a long time. I also have 3 kids, and all of them went through this process. So I've seen it from the financial aid perspective, but also the parents' perspective. So hopefully by the time we're done tonight, you'll have a better sense of what you need to do to apply for financial aid at all the different types of institutions you might be thinking about. So we'll discuss what is the cost of attendance. Financial aid is kind of fraught with a lot of acronyms. So COA is the cost of attendance. The Student Aid Index is the SAI. And we'll talk about what is financial need, because there's a difference between calculated financial need and actual financial need. The categories and types and sources of financial aid. We'll go through a little bit of the FAFSA, which has been abbreviated over the years. So it's a pretty quick and easy process to complete the FAFSA. We'll also talk briefly about the CSS profile that is only used for certain schools, mostly private schools. Talk about special and unusual circumstances. And there's a couple of things that are new this year for 26-27 that those of you who may have completed the FAFSA, even just last year, there are a couple of new things. So financial aid is all of the funds that a student receives or the family receives to help pay for their post-secondary educational expenses.
Hey, Rochelle, I'm sorry to interrupt. So you're on the very first screen. Are you meaning to go to another screen at this point?
Is it not advancing?
It's not advancing quite yet.
Oh, because it is on mine.
Okay.
This is concerning. Let's see. I wonder, so you're not seeing the cost of attendance title?
No, we have that first screen up. What you need to know about financial aid.
It doesn't appear that you're actually in presentation mode.
Oh, well, that could be the problem.
Go to slideshow presentation.
Slideshow presentation. Let's close out of here.
Oh, very good. We can see.
You can see that now.
Yeah, what is cost of attendance? We can see that screen.
I guess it's not showing it in presentation mode, which is bizarre. But as long as you can see it, we'll just go from here.
Okay.
Manually have to click on every slide.
That's okay. So the cost of attendance is not only tuition and fees, which is what most people think of when they think of financial aid and, the cost to go to college. But there's also housing and food costs. There's books, course materials, supplies, equipment, transportation, miscellaneous other personal expenses. So all of those things are what makes up the cost of attendance. You're seeing the next slide now?
Yes.
Okay. Just figured I'd check in. So the student aid index is what's calculated using all of the information reported on the FAFSA. So there's a student contribution and a parent contribution. And together, because there's student information on the FAFSA and, contributor information on the FAFSA, together that results in what they call the student aid index, or sort of what is calculated as the family's ability to contribute towards the education. So it's important to know the cost of attendance and what the SAI is, because the difference between those two is what's the calculated financial need. And that's where I was saying most families feel that they have a much greater need than that calculated financial need, because the student aid index can be somewhat inflated. Most families, unless their student aid index is 0, or now you can even have a negative SAI, most families are like, how would they expect me to come up with that? But that is what financial aid offices are required to work with in determining financial need. So then financial aid falls into need-based types of financial aid and non-need-based aid. So for the non-need-based aid, it doesn't matter what your SAI is. It's really just the cost of attendance. We can't exceed the cost of attendance with any financial, the total of financial aid. So non-need-based financial aid doesn't take that SAI into consideration, but need-based aid does. So if you look at financial aid, there's really kind of 4 types. So there's the self-help aid, which are the loans and work study. And then there's gift aid. So that's the free money, scholarships and grants. Most often, if it's called a scholarship, it's a merit-based award. If it's called a grant, it's based on need, but that's not hard and fast. There are a lot of other schools and entities that will provide scholarships that do have a need component. But typically, that's where you kind of know the difference between need-based and merit-based. So financial aid can come from all of these sources. The federal government is what the FAFSA is determining, your federal financial aid. But states like New York State has financial aid. Some employers have benefits that allow employees to help fund their children's education or their education. There's private sources, and we'll talk about some of those. And then colleges and universities frequently have their own financial aid. So the largest source of financial aid comes from the federal government, typically. It's based on need mostly, but there is also a federal loan that is not need-based. Every student who completes the FAFSA in their first year is entitled to borrow up to $3,500, which is need-based, but a total of $5,500. So even if you're a multimillionaire and you complete the FAFSA, the school's still going to tell you what your loan eligibility is. And in that case, it would all be the unsubsidized loan, which is not need-based. Most of the other aid is based on need. You do have to complete the FAFSA each and every year. So if you want to be considered for any need-based aid, you do need to complete the FAFSA each year. And then the eligibility requirements have to be met. So the federal aid programs, there's the federal Pell Grant, which most people have heard something about. There's the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or SEOG. There's a Teacher Assistance for College and Higher Education, or the TEACH grant. Federal Work Study is a federal program That's where students will work on campus and earn funds just like a part-time, any other part-time job. So it's awarded, but you have to work to earn it. The federal direct subsidized loan is the need-based. The federal direct unsubsidized loan is not need-based. And then the federal direct plus loan is a parent loan that can be taken to help fill in the gap. That has had some changes, and we'll get to that in a minute. So for the Pell Grant changes, there was this creation of the Workforce Pell Grant. That probably doesn't apply to the folks here on this webinar, but if a parent is working, they may be eligible for the Workforce Pell Grant. But there's, it's based on the SAI. That's what determines your Pell Grant amount. And you can take it from one school to the other. It's the same regardless of where you go. Some of the plus changes, and the plus stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. That's what the PLUS stands for. Since there was a budget bill passed, new borrowers, so anybody who's new borrowing for the 26-27 academic year, because you can't borrow before July 1st for the 26-27 academic year, will have a loan limit of $20,000 per dependent student and an aggregate for each dependent student of $65,000. So if you add that up, $20,000 over 4 years would be more than $65,000. I didn't come up with this limit. I'm just telling you what it is. So that's something to keep in mind if you're using the plus loan to help fund your child's education. Just know that you're going to hit that aggregate loan limit at $65,000. So regardless of what program. Legacy borrowers can borrow at the previous loan limits for, so if you had a child in school this year that you borrowed a plus for, you can continue borrowing at those loan limits for the remaining 3 academic years or the time for the student to complete their program. New York State does have the TAP award, which stands for Tuition Assistance Program. And you do have to complete the FAFSA. And at the end of the FAFSA, there's a link that will take you out to complete the TAP application. TAP is based on your New York net taxable income. There's also merit-based programs through New York State, the Academic Excellence Award and some World Trade Center awards that are not based on need. But you do have to complete the TAP application to be considered for those. There's also the Excelsior Scholarship at SUNY's and CUNY. Most private schools don't participate in the Excelsior program. And as I said, you fill out the FAFSA, and most of the information from your FAFSA gets transferred to that state application here in New York State. The deadline for New York State TAP, and this trips everybody up, it's June of the spring semester of the academic year. Don't wait until then. You want to get it done before school even begins so that funds can be sent in a timely manner.
Hey, Rochelle,
Sure.
we have a question. So is that, so circling back to that Parent Plus loan, is the $65,000 a cap, is it per student per year or forever?
The
If you can review that.
$65,000 plus is an aggregate per dependent.
So per student.
Correct. Unless somebody changes it in the intervening years. Always possible.
Thank you.
But that is what it is as of this moment in time.
And does the, and the follow-up is, does it starts 2026?
Correct. It starts with any loans first distributed after July 1st, 2026.
Okay.
Yep. So if you'd borrowed this year in the plus loan, those limits don't apply because you're grandfathered in.
Okay.
But new borrowers have those loan limits.
So if you have a child that was in college and you did the Parent Plus loan, your limit is greater. If you have child number 2 that's going to college fall of 2026 and beyond, you have to observe the $65,000 limit.
That is my understanding. Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? These are good questions.
Yep. That's it for now.
Okay. So colleges and universities also have aid, and that's where the CSS profile comes in. So at private schools that typically have more funding than the SUNYs and the CUNYs, the CSS profile will also determine a student aid index, and that's where colleges can determine how much of their need-based funding they're going to award to students. There can also be other jobs on campuses that are not federal work study, but just jobs on campus that students certainly can participate in. The information on the FAFSA, all that same information is provided on the profile. And that's why there's a little bit more information on the profile. And that's why colleges use that information in determining their own need-based funding. The deadlines can vary by institution. It's always best to meet the earliest deadline of any deadlines so that you make it in on time. There's also private sources. So there's foundations, businesses, civic organizations, charitable organizations. At this point, probably your high school guidance office and those folks that are putting this on for you tonight have a lot of resources to help you find some of those local scholarships. Local scholarships are typically easier, or at least you have a better chance of receiving. There are many, many scholarship searches out there online. And by all means, if it's free and you want to apply for those scholarships, please do. But just know those scholarships that are out on the internet for everyone are out on the internet for everyone. And you're narrowing your pool if it's a local scholarship. If it's a business that you work for and they have scholarship programs, then, start there. Where they might know you or know your family, that's always the best place to begin. Again, you want to be cognizant of deadlines and make sure the applications are in on time. It's never too early to start researching those private scholarships. The early bird catches the worm.
Rochelle, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
About the deadlines. I think because it's not a hard and fast deadline for financial aid, I think it causes a little confusion. When should I complete the FAFSA and submit it, or the CSS profile? Is there a recommended time frame that families and students should kind of focus on?
Most colleges and universities will have their deadlines pretty clearly posted on their website. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're filling out your FAFSA and CSS profile at the same time you're completing your application for admission, you're probably okay. You just don't want to wait until you've been admitted and then go out and fill them out.
There's a question about the CSS profile. Are they required for all private universities, or could they also be required for some public ones?
So typically it's just private schools that require it. When you go to the CSS profile, there's a list of schools that require it. Only complete the CSS profile for a school that requires it. There is a fee for completing the CSS profile, and it has significantly more questions than the FAFSA. So it's going to take you a little bit longer to complete the CSS profile. And you don't want to take your time or your money applying for something that the school doesn't require. So I would only complete the CSS profile if it's required by that institution. So you could be applying to 10 schools and only one of them requires the CSS profile, and that's fine. You just pay the fee for the one school and be done with the CSS profile. If you're applying to 10 schools and 3 require the profile, the cost is a little bit higher because it's got a flat rate for the first school and then it's an additional fee for each other school, but only do it for schools that require it. Any other?
That's it for now.
So always check with your employer. I know my son worked at Price Chopper and they have scholarships. So even if students are working in and around the community, they should always check to see if any employers have scholarships, because again, they know you, it's a smaller pool of applicants, and every little bit helps. There is a federal student aid estimator. At this point, if you go in, you can, and the link is right down there, studentaid.gov/aid estimator. And basically, you're going to put in all of the information that you're going to put in on your FAFSA, and it's going to give you an estimated SAI. I would say since the FAFSA is currently open and available, there's probably little need to go in and do the SAI estimator, because by completing the actual FAFSA, you will get your SAI. It's usually within 24, 48 hours. So at this point, I don't know that it's completely beneficial, but there are also estimators for financial aid on each college's website. There's the, I'm blanking on the net price calculator, which will take the information that it asks and kind of run it through and say what a similar student received in a year's past. So if you're trying to get a sense of, can we afford this school, using that tool, that net price calculator at this point might be your best bet. And completing the FAFSA and getting your actual SAI, then you'll know what your SAI is compared to their cost of attendance.
I've got a quick question
Sure.
about the CSS profile. So the question is, should the family wait until they find out if their child has been accepted to that particular college to complete the CSS profile?
I would say no. Most colleges want that data
Right.
in-house, so processed and in-house
Mhm.
once the student's been admitted, so they can put together a financial aid award. If you wait until the student's been admitted and then you complete the CSS profile, it takes, a week to 10 days to get processed and received on campus. So you're just delaying receiving the information if you wait. Again, only for schools that require it, but if they do require it, I would say go ahead and complete it the same time, roughly, that you're completing the FAFSA. So what is the FAFSA? Well, as the name would imply, it stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And coincidentally, there's no fee for completing the FAFSA because it's free. It collects demographic and financial information. It uses that to calculate that SAI, and that's what colleges are using to offer financial aid. It's available both in English and Spanish, and it did become available October 1st. So it is open and available, and you can go in once we're finished here and get your FAFSA completed tonight, if that is your goal. But as I said, you want to make sure you complete it by the priority date, the earliest of all the priority dates.
We have a quick question about international financial aid. So if we have a student who goes to college in Canada or another country, are they eligible for United States financial aid or financial aid in general?
Federal financial aid can only be used at Title IV institutions, so they would be within the U.S. So outside of the U.S., you'd have to check with that institution to see if they provide any funding for international students.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So you can complete the FAFSA with pen and paper, or pencil and paper as it probably is. I would say that's not going to be your best bet. as long as you have access to the internet, and if you're here on this presentation, you do, completing it online is the quickest, easiest, and most beneficial way to complete the FAFSA. There's built-in edits so that you can prevent making some mistakes. There's some skip logic in there, so you are able to bypass some questions that are on the paper form. You don't have to manually enter any tax information because the FAFSA pulls that information directly from the IRS. Again, it takes about 24, 48 hours to be completed and have your SAI calculated. There's also some help instructions if you get stuck while you're completing the FAFSA. And you can check your application status online. If you put it in the USPS and send it off, it takes weeks, not days, for it to be completed. So as long as you can do it online, you can even, I believe there's a mobile app that you can do it on a phone, but computer's probably the best way to go. Before completing the FAFSA, you do have to create the student aid FSA ID. And again, this link here is where you would create it. Each person providing information on the FAFSA has to have their own unique FSA ID. And it has to be created before you can sign your FAFSA. So if you are the student, you have to create one. It has to have a unique email address. If you're the parent creating one, you use the same FSA ID, whether you have 1, 2, 3, 5 kids, it belongs to the parent. And so you would use that same ID year after year. But you do have to go in and create it. New this year, you can create it and then go right in and do your FAFSA and sign it. It does take a couple of days for them to verify the information. And in the past, students got hung up if their FSA ID hadn't been verified. But now you can go in, sign the FAFSA, and once it's verified, then it'll be completed. This is what it looks like when you log in to do your FAFSA online. I'm just giving you the screenshot because there's some other sites out there that are not the federal government site. So you want to make sure it says federal student aid and that it looks like this. And you're going to start the 2627 FAFSA form. And whether you're the student or the parent contributor, it'll ask you that.
We have a quick question. So do both parents need to create the FSA ID, or is only one parent required?
There's only one parent required to sign if they're the contributor on the FAFSA. There's no reason why both parents couldn't create an FSA ID. I can tell you my husband never created one. He's like, you're in financial aid, you fill out the FAFSAs. So only one parent is required to sign the FAFSA. So only one parent has to have the FSA ID. But if two parents create their own unique, they can't share it. They have to have their own unique FSA ID. They do have to use different email addresses. So those do have to be unique. I know some families have like a family email that they use. They each need their own unique email address. So once you start the FAFSA, using your FSA ID to log in to start the FAFSA will bring you here. So it's saying, welcome, Alex, because Alex was the one who entered the FSA ID. Then they check off if you're the student or the parent, and you click that little blue continue button. And there's some tutorials in the FAFSA to help you know what information it is they're really asking for. Everybody who is providing information on the FAFSA does have to say yes to the consent for the federal tax information to be transferred. If you say no, you cannot receive any federal aid. So it's important to know you have to say yes when it asks, are you willing to have your data transferred?
We got some questions.
Sure.
So for the FSA ID, the question is, let me get back there. So both the student and the parent needs to have their own unique FSA ID.
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Yep.
And students should be sure to use an email address that is not a school email address, because they will use that FSA ID for now until the end of them using the FSA ID. And if you forget your username or password, they're going to use that email to verify it's you. And if it's a school email that stops working, it's a big problem.
Right.
Um,
So each parent, they have their own private email and FSA ID,
Correct.
and then the student has their own email and FSA ID, not the high school or college email. They
Correct.
should
You
not
want
be
to
using.
use an email address that you will have access to for at least the next however many years you're going to be in college.
Right. And then to continue, another question, how about divorced parents? So if you have divorced parents, is it recommended that one of the divorced parents has that FSA ID, or do both of the divorced parents need the FSA ID?
So that's an excellent question. There might be a slide later on, and when we get to it, we'll just kind of cruise past it. There's only one contributing household. Let's just put it that way. So the way the language is written, the parent who's the contributor, if it's a dependent student, is the parent who provides the most financial support for that student. That's up to families to figure out who is the one providing the most financial support. But that is the only parent who would be providing information on the FAFSA. The CSS profile will ask information about, they call it the non-custodial parent, but it doesn't necessarily mean the parent with whom the student doesn't live, because now if you look at the parent who provides the most financial support, sometimes that's not the parent the student is living with, if that makes sense.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions.
Sure.
So getting back to that Parent Plus loan, can married couples each take out that $65,000 max, or is it per household, parent household? So, the mom get the Parent Plus loan and then the dad gets the Parent Plus loan? Is that possible?
This is all new.
Okay.
And that is an excellent question, because two parents can borrow plus loans. And it happens frequently in divorce situations that one parent borrows a plus for the fall, the other one borrows a plus for the spring, or they each borrow some percentage or some portion. So that might be the loophole,
right,
to allow for additional borrowing. But I would have to look that up. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying absolutely,
right,
because this is all new and
changed.
And things, as I said, frequently when things change so dramatically like that, once we're in the aid year, sometimes we find there's shifts in rules and regulations, let's just say. So that's what we know it to be right now. It is based on the parent borrower, and there can be more than one parent borrower, but it does have to be a parent. It can't be a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle.
Right.
It has to be a parent.
Okay. And then there was a question about if our office has printed copies of this year's FAFSA application. We don't have that in our office, but if somebody wanted to print out the questions ahead of time, is that something that they could do before they went online and started, getting all that information in? So they're not stopped along the way. They can prepare ahead of time.
Absolutely. If you go to, I think it's FAFSA 2627 PDF, you can download the PDF and have all 23 pages, which, yes, the paper copy is 23 pages. It's not that long. It's just has a lot of where online you can click for help. The paper has all of the wording of all of the help you could possibly need throughout the FAFSA. So that's why it's 23 pages. I don't want anybody to panic thinking 23 pages. It's mostly, answers and documentation and, where do you find things.
Okay.
But yes, anybody can, like I said, go online and just put in FAFSA 2627 PDF, and it should bring you to the paper form.
I added it into our chat, so the link is right in there.
Okay.
And then what else do we have? Does the student need to initiate the FAFSA? If not, when the parent contributor completes their portion, does a link get sent to the student to sign or complete?
Well, you guys are just getting ahead of me today. Yes, the student or the parent can be the one to initiate it, and then they have to invite the other person to connect the student information with the parent information. Well, I'm pretty sure I have a screen that kind of shows that in a bit. But either one can begin the FAFSA. But you want to make sure it's the parent who's the contributor who begins the FAFSA. If it's a divorce situation and the mom is the one who's providing the most financial support, dad should not be starting the FAFSA because it's going to use his information. So it would be incorrect. So as I said, consent is required by all the contributors on the FAFSA, and the IRS transfers the information. You will not see the answers. Once it populates your income from the IRS, it'll just say transferred from IRS. So don't panic. You didn't do anything wrong. That's just the way it works. It doesn't show you. It's just pulling it directly from the IRS, which eliminates a lot of the manual data entry. Probably the biggest error that families used to make was including the cents, CENTS. So it inflated their income because they included the 32 cents as part of their AGI instead of just using the whole dollar. So this eliminates what line am I supposed to take it from, and it just pulls it in directly. This is what the paper FAFSA looks like. And as I said, you can use that PDF. I wouldn't, but this is what it looks like. So the student information has their contact information. Again, use an email that you're going to have access to later on once you're in college. It's going to ask for that consent for FTI if the student completed a tax return, the student's marital status, their college plans, personal and unusual circumstances have a place in there. So these are the questions that determine whether a student is dependent or independent. So to be independent, where you wouldn't have to have a parent contributor, you have to be born before January 1st of 2023. No, that's not right. That's incorrect. I don't know. Somebody clicked when they should have clacked. You have to be 24, married, a graduate or professional student, active duty military, a veteran, have children or legal dependents, an orphan or ward of the court or in foster care, emancipated minor under a legal guardianship, homeless or self-supporting at risk of homelessness. Those are all the questions that will determine if a student is dependent. So if they say no to all of these, then the parent contributor has to provide information. Unusual circumstances that can justify making an adjustment to a student's dependency status. If the student cannot contact their parent. So if they say no to all of those, but contacting the parent would be harmful to the student, they can be considered provisionally independent, but they have to follow up with the institutions that they're applying to for a dependency override. So although they can fill out the FAFSA and sign it, it doesn't get processed and it doesn't go anywhere until they follow up with the school to see if they are willing to do a dependency override. And usually there's some sort of documentation as to why the student can't provide parental information. So again, demographic information, citizenship, the parent, it's going to ask the parent's education status, if the parent was killed in the line of duty, high school information, and then the tax return information comes directly from the IRS, and also asset information. Now, you don't have to pull out all the change in your pockets. It's just sort of a rough idea of, cash savings and checking. If the student has any other assets like CDs or stocks, bonds, they would include that in the asset information.
I have a quick question here,
Sure.
actually a comment and then a question. So a parent shared that they started their online FAFSA form and you're able to save it.
Yep.
So they started it on Saturday, saved it, and then they were able to finish it off on Sunday, and then they were able to submit it. So it doesn't have to, once you start it, you don't have to submit it right away. You can save and come back. And then there is another question. Does a parent have to take out loans with the student through FAFSA, or can the student do it on their own?
Another very good question. So nobody requires anybody to take out any loans. We are required as financial aid professionals, if a student completes the FAFSA, we are required to tell them what their maximum loan eligibility is through the subsidized and unsubsidized loan programs. Some colleges will provide parents with their plus loan eligibility. But just because you're told what you can borrow doesn't mean you have to borrow. Now, some families have to borrow because they don't have the cash to pay the rest of the bill after financial aid. But that's a personal decision whether the parent is going to be a plus borrower, or some students prefer to be the borrower using alternative loan programs, private loans. But they do require a credit-worthy co-borrower. So that's where it doesn't have to be a parent to be the credit-worthy co-borrower. That could be an aunt or an uncle, an older sibling. Although grandparents frequently have excellent credit, if they're retired and on a fixed income, sometimes they don't have the debt to income ratio to get them the best interest rate. But nobody is going to require somebody to borrow a loan, but we are required to tell you your loan eligibility for federal loans. Did that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay. So the student will indicate, if other questions pop up, by all means, interrupt me. But in the student section, that's where they indicate the colleges they want to receive this information. You can always go back in and add colleges. You can put in up to 20. This is also where the parent invitation is going to be. And there's going to be a place where you can review all of your information before you sign it. And you use that FSA ID to sign the FAFSA. So again, this is new. Last year, students couldn't provide their parents with the code. They had to wait until they got the invitation link, and there were some broken links along the way. But now the student can invite the parent. They have to provide the email address that the parent used for their FSA ID to invite them to complete their portion of the FAFSA. And then when they get that email, they click on the link and it should bring them to the student's FAFSA. I know this is kind of hard to see, but there is now a pop-up where the student can take a screenshot and send that to their parent. And then when they go in, they can just use that link, that code, instead of waiting for the link to come. So it can be a little bit quicker that way. And vice versa. When the parent invites if the parent starts it and they invite the student, they also would have that link that they could share with their student.
Quick question. So, do parents have to make the FSA ID at the same time when students are making it, or can that be done at two different times?
You can do the FSA ID today and complete the FAFSA on the weekend. You can set up your FSA ID and then go right into completing the FAFSA, but you can start the FAFSA without your FSA ID, but you can't sign it and complete it until you have it. So it really makes sense to do your FSA ID first so that you're not, leaving that FAFSA hanging out there, because after a certain amount of time, I think it's stale dates and then you have to start all over. So definitely do the FSA ID creation first, but it doesn't matter who creates the FSA ID first or second or today, tomorrow, the next day, as long as it's before starting the FAFSA. So this is where the invitation will go to the parent, and that's where you can just click on the link and it'll bring you to the other portion of the FAFSA. Parents' information, kind of similar. Identity, contact information, again, use an email address that you check. So if there's any information sent, you'll see it. Again, you have to do the consent for the FTI, or the federal tax information transfer from the IRS. It'll ask marital status, state of residence, if there's been any means, federal benefits through the means tested, SNAP, those sorts of benefits, tax filing status, the number in the household size, and the number in college. For those families who may have completed a FAFSA in years gone by, the number in college used to be more important because it would divide it used to be called the expected family contribution, by the number in college. Unfortunately, they've done away with that. So whether there's 1 in college or 3 in college, that SAI is going to be the same. It'll include tax return information so that they can transfer the information back from the IRS. Again, parent asset information, and whatever else they ask, you want to complete that. Once the parent has completed, they'll review their information, and then the signature is that FSA ID. That's why you have to have it to go ahead and complete it. And you'll know it's been completed when you see that, congratulations, the FAFSA form has been completed. So the student won't see that if they start the FAFSA. And the parent won't see that if they start the FAFSA. It's the last person to provide all the necessary information that gets to see the congratulations, you're done. Some other considerations, if the student is independent, which probably doesn't apply to this crowd right here, but it will require the spouse's information as well. And that consent for the FTI is required for all contributors, including the student, if the student had a spouse, the parent, the other parent, if they're providing, if 2 parents are providing information, but they did not file a joint tax return, because all parents living in the same household do have to provide information, and it can only import the data from the FTI for parents who've given consent. So that would be the only situation where I think you might have to have the FSA ID for both parents if they didn't file a joint tax return, but they're completing this with both parents' information. So it's the student's parent, and that includes step parent if the parent is remarried. So if the student's parents got divorced, parent is remarried and has filed a joint tax return with that spouse, both of that spouse and their information gets pulled over in the FTI. So this is just,
Oh, sorry, just quickly. I answered the question, but I want to confirm that I'm correct. So if there's a situation where there's twins, who are applying for the FAFSA application for the same year, they have to apply separately for each student. I said each student needs their own FAFSA.
Correct. Yes.
Good.
You got it 100%. Yes. It is the student's FAFSA. So it belongs to the student. So if you have twins, triplets, quadruplets, each student has to complete. But because of the FTI, I believe if you have more than one child, once you put in your FSA ID, it'll pull that data that you've already completed on the other child's FAFSA. I haven't tested that, but that's what they say should happen. So if things are pre-populated, like if you do your FAFSA for one child and then you go in to do for the other child and you're like, wait a minute, where did they get this information? It could be that they pulled it from the other student's FAFSA.
I got another quick question.
Sure.
So if the parents file separately, do they have to share the same FSA ID?
Nope, every individual has their own FSA ID. So only one parent has to sign it. If parents filed separately, they will have to data enter the information. It won't pull in from the FTI. If they're married filing separately, those are the instances where you're going to have to data enter the income information, but it tells you exactly what line on what tax return to data enter that. So yes, if parents live in the same household, even if they're not married, they both have to report information about their income. So for dependent applicants, the family size includes the student, the parent, and that parent's spouse if they're married, the parent's dependent children, even if they live, away in college, and any other people that live with the parent who the parent is providing support for. Independent applications, it's the student and the spouse and any dependent children they may have. So once the FAFSA is completed, it gets processed by the Federal Processing Center or Services, FPS, and then a copy goes to the college and a copy of the results goes to the student. There's 4 sections once the FAFSA has been completed. It's the eligibility overview, the FAFSA form answers, the school information, and then next steps. You can print that summary if you are so inclined. So you have record of having completed it.
Got another quick question. So
Sure.
aside from the FAFSA, what are the options for non-US citizen students to receive any kind of aid and scholarships?
If you're not an eligible non-citizen, you wouldn't be completing the FAFSA, and you'd have to check with each individual institution to see what kind of funding they provide for non-citizens that are not eligible non-citizens. A lot of schools, only provide the federal data and institutional aid. So if you're not eligible for the federal aid, then it would just be the institutional aid. And you'd want to check with each school to see what kind of resources they have if you're ineligible for the FAFSA. So what if you fill out the FAFSA and after you hit submit, you're like, oh no, I made a mistake. It's okay, you can make corrections. You do have to wait for it to be processed though. So you can't make the correction right then and there. You have to wait until you get that email saying it's been completed, processed, here's your SAI. And then you can log back into the FAFSA and make whatever corrections you need to make. The colleges will get a copy of all of those corrections. So if you make a change, probably the most common correction is a student wants to add a school. They thought they were applying to these schools and then they realize, oh yeah, I want to add this school. You can go in, make that correction and add the school. So special circumstances, which are different than the unusual circumstances, which is regarding the dependency override. If there's any special circumstance that you can't report on the FAFSA, which is pretty much any special circumstance, you would want to contact the school directly and ask them what do they need you to provide. So the special circumstances that are most common is somebody's lost a job, because this year's FAFSA for 26-27 is going to be looking back to your income from 2024. Sometimes things change between 2024 and 2025. Or even moving into 26. So if there's been a huge change in employment, or sadly, if somebody has passed away, you want to contact the school directly and find out what do they need. So you're sending them the appropriate information. Schools typically will take that information and use it to help families, but the decisions are final, and you can't, go to the U.S. Department of Education and say school XYZ didn't recalculate my information based on this year's tax returns. They can do it, but we're not required to do it. Most schools do it though. So these are some of the special circumstances. As I said, the death of a parent, or unusual medical or dental expenses that were not covered by insurance, loss of employment. If there was a divorce after filing the FAFSA, you would want to contact the school. If you're divorced when you file the FAFSA, you would check off divorced, and that's not a special circumstance because it's already calculating based on that divorce. Additional family members that were not originally reported on the FAFSA. If there's secondary school tuition, those are all things that financial aid offices have the ability to review and make a decision on. So the CSS profile, as I said, you only want to complete it for a school that requires it. It does ask way more information than the FAFSA. Whatever questions are on the profile, you do need to answer, no matter how ridiculous they might seem. It's used to determine institutional funding. So that's why it's typically only private schools that have more institutional funding. Not that SUNY and CUNY don't have a couple scholarships here and there, but for the most part, they don't have the kind of institutional funding that would justify having families complete the profile. Each school can have different questions. So your CSS profile may not look exactly like your friend or neighbor's CSS profile, because some schools ask about the non-custodial parent, other schools don't ask about the non-custodial parent. So there could be different questions. It is available now as of October 1st. So I would say do the FAFSA first. That's quick and easy, kind of get it out of the way. The CSS profile will take a little bit longer because you're going to have to do the data entry. It's not going to be pulled in directly from the IRS. And I think right on time, we have covered everything, unless there are questions. And this slide presentation was presented, sort of generated by NASFA, which is the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, of whom I am a member. And why recreate the wheel? They already did such a good job. I just put their slides.
So we do have a couple of questions, Rochelle. Sure. So back to those special circumstances, is a new diagnosis of terminal illness of a parent an example of a special circumstance?
Absolutely. And as I said, contact the schools directly, and you do have to do it each one, and ask them what they would need.
So they would the parent would contact the financial aid office and find out what documentation they'd have to provide to share that special circumstance.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And then I'm gonna come back to this one question, but so twins question. Will they wait for approval for the first application, or both can be done the same day? Will the fund amount be determined differently on each of them based on who got approved first? How does it work based on requirements of total SIA that financial year?
Okay. So you can do them right at the same time, but if the first one hasn't been processed, you likely will just have to answer all the questions on the second one, which is no big deal. The FAFSA is pretty quick and easy now. Um, each student does get their own individual SAI. If both students had the same income and asset information, they should have the same SAI because the parent information should be the same. But if one student reported that they earned, $6,000 from a part-time job and the other one earned $2,000 from a part-time job, that could change the SAI. Or if one student, was a better saver than the other and had more cash savings or checking funds, that could change the SAI, but they should be fairly close.
Is there, there is a question, about the general process of how it all works. Is there something that has like a step-by-step, what should I do first? What should I do second? There's a question, so, how can it be laid out to, simply put from start to finish? Is there some kind of, are you aware of any kind of a document that might just kind of boil things down about maybe the steps that have to be done?
That's a good question. I don't know that there is like one go-to.
Right.
Definitely the FAFSA and applying to colleges is step one. Step two is if there's any profile that needs to be completed, you do that. Okay. Step three is look for outside scholarships while you're waiting to find out if you've been admitted. And then once you get your acceptance letters and your financial aid offers, that's when you can do your side-by-side comparison and look at, what's the cost of attendance, what financial aid are they offering me, and what's going to be my out-of-pocket expense. And that's probably the best way to do your side-by-side comparison, because SUNY is going to have a much lower cost of attendance than someplace like RPI. Right. So the SAI is going to be the same at each of those schools, but your out-of-pocket cost sometimes is the same because the private school is offering you more financial aid than the SUNY or the CUNY. So really the process is to apply, get your information, make your decision about where you can afford to go, and then you submit your deposit, and then you wait for the fall and you are a college student. But, whenever I'm stuck and like, how do I do something? I just Google it. Right. And I'm sure if you Google, what are the steps to apply for college? I'm sure somebody out there has already put together, the step-by-step, what do you need to do?
Right.
Excellent resource in the guidance office that, you've helped students for years and years navigate the process that I'm sure if you have any questions, your guidance office would be more than happy to help you.
Well, while you were speaking, I was Googling, what are the steps, is there any FAFSA steps, for parents? And then I just put in the chat, there is a link completing the FAFSA form steps for parents. So hopefully that's a good resource, at least for the FAFSA. Yep. So, that's a good start. Hopefully that helps.
And when you're completing the FAFSA, if you're stuck, there's always a little question mark you can click on, and then it opens up, the explanation of what they're really asking. Basically, if you just read the questions and follow, the FAFSA is pretty easy to complete because you don't have to pull out, your tax returns. That's just going to come over unless, as I said, you filed separately, and then you do have to pull out your tax returns. But if you click on the little question mark, it'll bring up the help, and usually that can get you through it.
So divorce question, confirming that this parent would be the primary financial provider as long as their personal income is more than 50% of other parents' contribution via child support.
Yes, and as I said, each family has to make the determination who's providing the most financial support. So if the student lives in household A, but household B is providing the most financial support, it would be household B that's completing the FAFSA. If it's equal, then it's whoever the student lived with most in the last 12 months, if it's truly equal.
Is it often that divorced parents will maybe 1 year, parent A will do the FAFSA and another year parent B will do the FAFSA? Does that sometimes happen?
The only way I could see that happening is if there was change in income and, what they're providing to that student for support.
Okay. And then there was a question generally. We're going to post this presentation on our high school website. We'll also, Ashley Kaplan is the tech person in our office, so we rely on Ashley to help us out. And actually, Amy Knapp is also technically involved, especially with our website. So we will get this presentation, when it's final, the recording is done, and then we will figure out a way to get that out either at least on our high school website and potentially maybe, I don't want to promise anything, it might be able to be emailed to families, but we will let them know either way, either on the website or through email. Okay, so I think we answered all of the questions that we've got in there. Hope, if there's any last ones. One of the things that I found, I think you've mentioned this before, Rochelle, is should parents come up with a question, the best bet is to contact one of the financial aid offices that their child is applying, of the college that their child is applying to. Would you recommend that?
Absolutely. If you have a question, even if your child has not yet applied,
Right.
Most colleges have pretty robust websites with a lot of the information right there that you can, I know that's my first go-to, is go to the website and kind of click search and try and find the answers to the questions, because I always have the questions at 10 o'clock at night when nobody's there to answer the phone. But you can email, you can call. Financial aid offices, we're here to help you. We're not trying to keep you from getting aid. We're trying to help you get as much aid as you are eligible for. So I would say, absolutely call a financial aid office, send an email, look on some websites if you have any questions.
And then the last question I'm going to write in the chat, it says, when should you start the process? And in terms of the FAFSA and the CSS profile, it opens up October 1st. So
right. So now.
That's the earliest. Yes. So this
Right.
is, even though this is the 9th, that's okay. If you didn't start it on the 1st, I would say, if people can get it done probably within the month of October, if you got to, dip into the month of November, depending on what's going on, but we always try to encourage families to get this process done sooner rather than later. And we tend to say, let's do, October, November timeframe, if possible.
By Thanksgiving is usually a good benchmark.
For Thanksgiving, that's actually a very popular statement in our office. We kind of get a little panicked when it's before Thanksgiving because there's a lot going on.
I was also going to say that we'll be having an in-person financial aid support evening program on October 30th. So information on that will be getting sent out through School Messenger probably tomorrow or Monday.
Right. As needed help. So if you need the help, great. If you don't, that's okay too. We have we lean on our local experts. They come in and, it's like a half-hour time slot, I would say, right, Ashley, tends to be is what we allocate. And, a lot gets done and a lot of answers get, or a lot of questions get answered. All right. Well, I think we're at that point. We have lots of thank yous. We are certainly very pleased and grateful that you helped us out once again, Rochelle. It's like we have an office for you at the Guilderland High School if you wish to join.
Well, I want to say you're welcome, and I'm happy to help. Just glad we can get this together, whether it's in person or online like this, to make sure questions get answered and people know what they're doing.
Yep. So so it's the convenience of virtual. I'm glad it worked out, and thanks again, everyone, for participating. And we will get this presentation out as soon as we can. So hopefully, probably early next week, I would probably venture to say. So, all right, take care. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.